Welcome everybody to today's session. Today I want to talk about how we can listen in our relationships in a better way to reduce the amount of arguing or the intensity of the arguments that we have in our relationships. Because let's face it, we're going to argue in relationships. We're going to disagree. We're going to find those times that we argue with one another. But the question is, how often do we do it? And how long do they last? And how intense do they get? And I found as a marriage counselor or a relationship counselor that that's probably one of the main reasons people come into counseling is because they want to reduce the amount of arguing that goes on in their relationship. Because when we argue with one another, it obviously just kills the connection that we have with each other. And again, some people can argue for minutes, and some people can stretch their argument for days, maybe weeks even. And so we really want to reduce the amount that we argue in a relationship so that we can enjoy each other a lot more and spend a lot more quality time with each other. And I have found as a therapist that there are specific things that people do to argue. And when these things are done, again, the argument's guaranteed. But there are specific things that we can do, again, to significantly reduce the amount of time that we argue with each other and for what we argue about. If you're like most of the people that come into counseling that I talk to, is that most people argue about dumb things. You're probably not arguing about what I call big ticket items. I'm talking about infidelity, mistrust, addiction, or any other kind of deceit or major things in a relationship. Most of the arguments that we have in our relationships aren't over those things. They're over dumb things. They're over who left the milk out, who didn't pick this up, who didn't plan for that. Whatever the case may be, again, you'll probably admit you fight and argue over dumb little things. And so I really want to help you eliminate that by giving you some skills and tools in how to listen to each other more effectively. And when we do this, I can guarantee that you'll reduce the amount of time that you argue. I'm not going to say you're going to eliminate it because I don't think that's possible. We're going to argue in relationships. We're going to have disagreements, but they don't have to be frequently and they don't have to be drawn out and really intense. All right, so let's jump right in. I'm kind of a cheesy guy, so I have an acronym that helps me and helps my clients learn what to do when we're in a listening situation. And that is, I want you to love the other person. But I spell that L-U-V. And so what does this stand for? Well, obviously the first one is listen. This is about listening, and so we want to listen to the other person. And to listen effectively, I think first and foremost, we have to make sure we get rid of any distractions. We got to put down our phone. We got to turn away from the computer or the TV or stop doing what we're doing. We have to give the other person our undivided attention. We can't listen effectively if we're not focused and if we're not giving that undivided attention. So that's number one. Put down the distractions, look the person in the eye, and listen to what they have to say. Now I know some of you can say, well, I can be on my phone and listen. I can do this and listen. And maybe for some conversations that are meaningless, you can do that. But for important, serious conversations, you can't. Because really this idea of multitasking in our brain, science and research will tell you that that's a myth. Our brains really cannot do and focus on two things simultaneously perfectly. What it can do is switch back and forth very quickly, but not do two things at once. And we'll talk about that more in just a minute. But specifically us men, we're even more poor at switching back and forth than our female counterparts are. So we really have to have that undivided attention where our wives or our girlfriends, they might be able to do two things more at once than we can or appear to. We can't. Put down your device, turn off the TV, and focus. So that's number one. Listen, and listen with undivided attention. Now, what are we listening for? We want to listen with the intent to understand. And that's really important. And this idea of understanding others is not a new idea. This has been talked about and written about by a lot of professionals over the years. Dale Carnegie wrote about it in his famous book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Stephen R. Covey talks about it in his book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And he states that seek first to understand before you're understood. And in relationships, this is essential. We want to take the time to understand what our significant other's thoughts, perspective, feelings, and beliefs are about what they're talking about. If we're so wrapped up in trying to get them to understand us, then again, we're not going to have a good communication. We're not going to be able to listen effectively. So this is really important, that we want to listen with the intent to understand the other person, not for us to be understood. Now let's take a second and look at what do people do instead of these two things that increases the chance of arguing, or it guarantees the chance that there will be an argument or a fight. Well, let's go back to listen. Instead of listening, one, we're distracted. Or as soon as we hear something that we disagree with, what do? Most of us will start to plan our response in our mind. We start thinking about our rebuttal and how we're going to prove that the other person is wrong. Or we're going to be thinking of how to fix what they're talking about, or maybe if they're complaining, or whatever the case may be, if they're venting. We stop listening and we start planning our response. And even if we're not planning our response and staying quiet, we plan our response quickly and then interrupt and talk over that person. As soon as we do that, we are not going to be listening, obviously, and there's going to be an argument. So once we got a response in our head, what do we likely do? We get defensive. And defensiveness is a big killer in relationships and in communication and listening. Because once we get defensive, and then what we're going to do is attack the other person. So once we get defensive, chances are we're going to criticize the other person in a response to our defensiveness. And as soon as we do that, then they're going to start criticizing us, and then it's going to be this ping pong match back and forth of just this, again, verbal argument now. So that's what usually happens. Instead of listening and understanding, we plan our response and we get defensive. Now what's next? What's the V? After we've listened, we believe that we've understood what they're saying, what they're thinking, perceiving, feeling. If we don't have a good understanding, we can check in and ask. But once we get that, what we really want to do is validate them. We want to validate their thoughts and their emotions. Now, for me, validation doesn't mean in this situation that we may agree with. We may not. But we validate them and we give them the right and the permission to have their own thoughts and feelings about a certain subject or about what's been going on in the relationship or in their life. And I have found that when people are validated, it's just going to reduce the tension immediately. Even if the person that's presenting and starts talking, even if they say attack us or come at pretty hostile, if we can still do this, listen with the intent to understand, and then validate their frustration, their anger, or whatever emotion they're feeling, chances are they're going to come down to a place emotionally that there can be a discussion instead of an argument. And that is really, really important. And so we validate instead of criticize, or criticize their thoughts, criticize their emotions, tell them what they should be thinking or what they should be feeling or shouldn't be feeling. As soon as we start telling people what they should or shouldn't feel or what they should or shouldn't think, again, they're going to get defensive. And again, that's where arguments really happen. But if we can validate them, then they're going to feel better. They're going to feel less defensive. And again, we're going to have a better opportunity to have a discussion. Now, there you go. there's a big first part. We love the person by listening with the intent to understand and then validating them. But there's a couple of more key components to listening that are really important. So a lot of time arguments happen because someone comes at us and they're upset of something that we did or didn't do. And again, a knee-jerk reaction when that happens is to criticize and or turn the tables and blame them for whatever we did or didn't do, and we don't want to take ownership for it. And then that blame game can start the process or continue the argument. And so instead of that, I think we need to let go of our egos and our pride, and we have to be able to apologize. Again, if it's something directed towards us. And we don't want to have to be right all the time. Somebody once said, would you rather be right or happy? And I think that's a good question. Sometimes we just need to apologize. But you might be saying, well, what if I didn't do anything wrong? Well, that may be the case, but how they perceive something or how they took something may warrant at least an apology for not intending to upset them or intending to do whatever happened from their perspective. And so we can apologize in a lot of different ways. And it's really important to understand that apologies are accepted in a lot of different ways. Gary Chapman, who wrote the 5 love languages, also has a theory about 5 apology languages. So I'd highly recommend looking that up as well and knowing what way our significant other wants and needs an apology, because that can be a huge piece. We're not going to get into it really any here, but just know that that's out there. Go to the 5lovelanguages.com and look up apology language, and that's a huge piece. So again, apologize. And somebody once said, sometimes we need to apologize even when it's not our fault. And again, I think that's really important and can be really valid to reduce the tension in arguing. And then, after we apologize, after we've, again, done all these things, we want to give the person some assurance. We want to let them to know that we're going to make it through this argument, we're not going to run, we're not going to jump to divorce or separation or ending the relationship or breakup. We want to let them know that, hey, we may be frustrated with each other right now, but that we love them and that we will do our best to make it work. Or we want to give them assurance that we will start to work on that thing that they're upset about, if it's directed toward us. Now, if this communication is about them just venting about work or about their family or whatever the case may be, then we can assure them that they'll get through it, they'll overcome the thing that they're struggling with, and that we want to support them. Now, instead of assuring, sometimes we want to jump in and fix things, and we don't want to do that. We want to let them vent. We want to give them assurances and then do all these steps. So there's some really key skills on how to reduce the amount of arguing or the intensity of our arguments. Again, you want to listen with the intent to understand. You want to validate the person. You want to apologize if necessary, and then you want to give them assurance. I hope this was helpful. I can guarantee that if you do practice this, it will improve your communication and it'll reduce your arguing. I've had numerous couples come back and talk about how this really changed their relationship and how practicing this really reduced the amount of arguing that they do in a relationship. If this was helpful, please pass it along to someone else and share it. Let me know how this works for you. Let me know how these steps worked in your relationship. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel, give it a thumbs up, and until next time, make it a great day and make it a great week.